If you follow this show for some time, you know that Steve Paikin has been a guest. I actually interviewed him live. He's just a remarkable individual. He's become a close friend. And on his new podcast, which I love, he had this guest on, Rima Berns-McGowan.
The connective tissue for me is genuinely, how do I make the world a better place?
Who was, as expected, because his roster often includes politics, was an MPP in Ontario.
Being Canadian is, in fact, being open to integration of people who come from somewhere else.
But she switched courses midstream to become a medium, someone that connects the people on the planet, the people that have left them.
I connect. There are a series of steps that I go through to say, okay, Spirit, I'm ready to work.
I knew I had to have her on the show. I just finished interviewing. We spent an hour together. I could have spent the rest of my life talking to her. She's so much beauty and good that roars through her.
I think if we just all were able to be still and quiet and feel inside for that good, it is there. All of us are capable of it, and we're capable of connecting to it. And there is a greater good. I am absolutely convinced of it.
And last week, if you listened to the show, it was on Oscar Arias, Nobel Peace Prize winner, and his life's quest, and why I call the show Give Peace a Chance. Well, I'm calling this show Give Good a Chance. I hope you listen to all of it. Suspend your disbelief and just think about what she has to say, who she is and why she's here.
The quest to understand what makes harmonious societies work and how do you actually create inclusion became very central.
And she's here to talk about identity, belonging, and following a calling that might defy convention, might have many of you immediately dismiss, but I can promise you that her quest resonates with purpose.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated.
Rima, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for having me.
I believe, this is without scientific research, but just by doing so many of these episodes, that so much of who we are today began with who we were as a little person in our family's homes. You probably don't have a lot of memories of your family leaving South Africa, but I'm sure that many stories have been shared. So give us some context of what life was growing up with a family that probably felt they were going to spend their life in a certain country and then ends up across the world to Canada.
I was only 4 when we left. There are some very, very nascent memories from the before time. A lot of it got filled in afterwards. I do remember the journey and the fear that my parents had, but there was never a doubt that they were leaving because apartheid was wrong. And my dad was so disgusted, felt after the Sharpeville massacre that he had to get involved in the struggle. But it was a time when people who did were being shut out of work, or they were jailed or murdered. And my mother said, you know, you have 2 small children now, so you have to really think about them. And my dad said, well, in that case, we can't stay. And Canada was a country that seemed to offer freedom and promise, and the opposite of what South Africa was all about. It offered inclusion as opposed to exclusion. And so it was very much with that dream in mind that my parents left South Africa with me and my 18-month-old brother, and never having seen snow, managed to arrive in Montreal on the 20th of January. That dream of creating a good life in a country that could make room for everybody was at the heart of their journey and very much became, to your point, at the heart of mine.
In an article, I think it was called Transitions, you talk about mixed race ancestry. You talk about Jewish and Cape colored. You talked about this layered identity. And at the same time, you talk about how inclusive Montreal was. And I'm sure compared to South Africa, it was night and day. But did you feel that your family truly belonged, that we were all in this together, that there was no sense of hierarchy or class system or racism or bias?
So in South Africa, my family had been considered white. 3 of my 4 grandparents were Jewish. They had come from refugee families escaping pogroms in various parts of Europe. My father's mother was, in fact, Afrikaner and Cape Colored, a fact that she had to keep quiet under apartheid, or her marriage to my grandfather would have been illegal. However, when we moved to Canada, I experienced an enormous amount of both anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism while I was growing up, because as light as my skin is, it was significantly darker than that of my Scots-Irish classmates and teachers. So I experienced all of that. The assumption was that I was mixed, and it was still very much a time when the one drop rule seemed to matter, and the sense that there was some Black in me seemed to taint me, and I experienced an enormous amount of that. It was hard to talk about with my parents because they had this idea that they'd come to such a perfect place. And I was told that I didn't belong and that I'd never amount to anything. And therefore, the quest to understand what makes harmonious societies work and how do you actually create inclusion became very central.
Your academic studies, your published works were really about a world where that utopia didn't exist. There wasn't that sense of inclusion in society. How did you connect the dots and say, even what's going on in this world, even what's happening in Montreal, even what I'm hiding from my parents, there is still hope for cultures that can live and work and prosper together, that we're all one human race?
I did my PhD in international politics, and my thesis, which was published by the University of Toronto Press, was the integration of Somalis and the Somali community as Muslims. It was a comparative study between London, England, and Toronto. What was really powerful about that work was that I think it showed that when you allow people to be themselves and you allow them to feel at home fully, they will feel very invested in the country that they have moved to, and they will make it home and in a really beautiful way, and that it is so much more powerful than alienating them and telling them that you will never belong here.
What are a couple of things we could do as a society? Because I see us more divided than we've ever been. Let's counter that. Let's talk about a couple of things that we could be doing as a country to live the lessons you identified in your PhD and subsequent work.
It only takes actually looking at the facts of what has happened in Canada as compared with many other immigrant receiving countries, where we did such a much better job of defining Canada to its core as a country that is really good at integrating people from all over the world. That being Canadian is, in fact, being open to integration of people who come from somewhere else at a very deep level that goes beyond the multicultural notions of food and dance and superficial things like that, but really, really deep understanding that to totally take people in, to give them a seat at the table, makes us stronger in every possible way. It makes us more socially cohesive. It makes us a more harmonious society, certainly makes us a richer society culturally, and it makes us a stronger society economically.
You took this very successful academic career. You describe yourself in an interview as an introvert. The last place I should be is in politics, but you decided to run Beaches East York, which has happened to be where I live, as the MPP. Why politics?
It was really students of mine who, and I use this word in the fondest possible way, bullied me, cajoled me, begged me, entreated me, and actually got me elected because former students of mine had become very good organizers, and they're the ones who effectively made it happen. And when I initially agreed, I was terrified. The reason my students wanted me to try was because they said, you have such a good way of articulating why Canada is stronger when it works for everybody and why society is stronger when nobody's losing and everybody is winning. And there were many things, to be honest, that I loved about my 4 years. And they included the community work, which I really loved. But I also loved my work in the legislature. When I used to stand up and speak to a bill, and I used to bring in experiences from my research or my academic life or my work with people in community, I would notice that the government ministers, because I was, of course, in the opposition, the government ministers would put their phones down and listen to me. And then at the end of it, they would all say, "We always learn something."
Rima, you're building currency in politics, advocacy. People, as you said, even the opposition enjoy you there. And yet you choose not to seek re-election.
Not everybody was in it. And I should say, we're recording this on the day that Ken Dryden's funeral is occurring. And Ken Dryden is a person who did everything that he did, including going into politics for all the right reasons. He wanted to make the world a better place. And I think that if everybody did, then politics really would be a place where you could accomplish those goals. But right now, it's a very bitter, nasty, super partisan kind of place. The partisan politics and the nastiness really, really got to me. And after 4 years, I just didn't want to do it anymore.
You make one of the most interesting career changes, and that's when you decide that you're going to move from being a political force to an intuitive medium.
The connective tissue for me is genuinely, how do I make the world a better place? The Hebrew phrase is tikkun olam. How do I mend the world? How do I work to do that? And that is something that I have tried to do in absolutely every phase of my life. I've always been intuitive. That intuition has always been there. When I was a little kid, it started to rear its head in ways that were almost too much. And then it kind of goes away, but then it pokes itself up from time to time. And I noticed it when I was doing research. I was doing a research project at some point where I was interviewing a lot of people who'd come to Canada from conflict-afflicted places, and I did 220 interviews with people one-on-one. I suddenly realized that I knew what they were going to tell me. Not in general terms, but quite specifically, I knew what they were going to tell me, which made me a really good interviewer because I knew how to craft the next question so that it felt like they were safe. When I got into politics, of all places, my intuition seemed to get stronger. It kept me safe and it enabled me to help other people. I remember one case where I was canvassing not for myself, but for another person. You know, when you're canvassing, you're supposed to be at a door for 20 seconds max or a minute, and then you're supposed to leave. And there was just something about the fellow I was talking to. We were standing outside his little stoop, and I said, "How long have you been here? And why did you come?" And he said, "Oh, you don't want to know." And I said, "No, I really do." And those words flew out of my mouth. And part of my brain is thinking, "You do? You're not supposed to ask that here." You do. I sat down on his stoop and listened to him for an hour and a half. Then at the end of it, I said, "You need to speak to somebody. Here's the name of a professional." And then I went on my way. And 2 years later, during COVID, I was crossing the street in a completely different part of the riding. And he came up to me and he said, "Oh my gosh, it's you, Rima. I have to let you know you saved my life."
Wow.
I called the person you said. I listened to her. I wasn't planning to stay here. I was planning to exit the world. And because of you, I'm still here. So towards the end of my time in politics, I decided to actually go off and figure out what was going on. How did I know these things? How was I able to know these things? What was I picking up on? What was happening? What senses was I using? And because I come at this from such an evidence-based perspective, I think this is partly due to COVID, was able to find people online to take classes from, very grounded people. But if you do this work properly, you're doing it evidentially. What I rapidly discovered, there are in fact a lot of people with big brains and PhDs who start with a very realist paradigm and with looking for evidence and have come to the conclusion that if we're going to be honest, materialism is a paradigm just like anything else, right? And so when there's evidence of things happening that don't fit with that, then you use scientific methodology and you go and study it. And so there's a lot of evidence for what you might call paranormal stuff. There's a lot to back up the work that I find myself doing now.
So I'm curious what you do, because you're dealing with people's lives. You're dealing with people's hopes and dreams. This is a path that you're taking people on.
I think there are really strong ethics that have to surround this work. And if somebody isn't doing it ethically, then there's a big problem. And I think you need to stay away from folks who are not being ethical about it. So let's start with the idea that we have more senses than the traditional 5. And I think that all of us have had some kind of experience. All of us, by dint of being human, have some form of intuitive ability. I think another way that it appears for a lot of people is when we've been looking for places to rent or buy, and we've walked into an apartment or a house and we've just gone, oh, no. It just doesn't. It might look okay, it just doesn't feel good. Or we'll walk into a room and people there won't be anything obvious on their faces, but they've just had a fight. You can feel it. We are using the senses that I'm talking about. So we'll get a gut sense about something, or sometimes we'll have a premonition. The phone will ring and we'll suddenly know who it is. Or we'll have a dream in which we have a dream that something happens and then it turns out a precognitive dream. It turns out to be real. So there are all these other senses and ways that we're picking up information. When I am doing a reading for somebody, I will meditate. I'll get a picture in my mind's eye, not with my physical eyes. And then I'll get a feeling of who this person is. As I'm talking to the person, the sense of who the person is, the essence of who they are, I'm able to describe enough of them that the person can recognize if I'm connected to the right person. And the more that we talk, the stronger that connection will come. The things that I'm given as evidence are things that I will often say, you can't make this stuff up. You just can't. It's too specific and it's not something that you can Google. And it's something that's very much about the relationship of the person who's coming in, the person in spirit, and the person that I'm talking to. And then once they're connected, you're able to actually have a meaningful conversation, if you will. That's where healing can happen.
How do you compartmentalize it? If you've had these experiences with people and then you try to go back to a normal day, or is there such a thing as a normal day for you because people realize that you're a potential gateway and therefore they're knocking on your door?
First of all, I should say that after having done this for a few years, readings get organized from up there. It's our people up there. The people here are the ones who have this, you know what, I feel like I should try this. And maybe she's a good medium and maybe I can trust her. So they're the ones who book an appointment or reach out and say, can we talk? But it's the person up there who's like, I have a thing to say. And this is the medium who can hear me. Like, this is the medium who can interpret for me. Because not everybody can read for everybody else, just as not everybody can be a therapist for everybody. But at the same time, I also have control over when I connect and how I connect. It is very, very, back to ethics, it's very unethical for me to walk up to someone in a grocery store or on the street and say, hey, someone is here who wants to say something to you. That could be just devastating for them, or they may not be prepared to hear it, or they may be afraid, like you would that's just rude.
But Rima, I want to challenge you on that for a sec, because you said the people up there are the ones that are coming to me. If someone up there is coming to you in that grocery store, how is it unethical for you to approach somebody and say that?
There's two things. The first is that I don't walk around in the grocery store connected. I disconnect.
Okay.
The other thing, though, is that I have a friend who at some point reached out to me and she said, I never, ever, ever want to be connected to my mom who has passed on. I never do. Is there anything that would compel me to? And I said, absolutely not. You always have the choice to say no. If her mother really wanted to talk to her and walked up to, tapped some medium on the shoulder in a grocery store where she was and said, can you please tell her blah, 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 and the person did, that would not be something that my friend would welcome.
Okay.
What I do find is often, for instance, I have had times where someone has come to see me, not telling me who they want to connect with. Like they've made the appointment, but they haven't told me who in spirit they've wanted. And I've said, okay, so the person who's coming forward is your mom or your dad or your grandmother or your brother or whomever. And the first thing out of their mouths is, I need to apologize to you. I want to say sorry. They're leading with that. Often the person here will say, that's interesting. A year ago, I wouldn't have been ready to hear that, but now I am. So there's a way that you can get that message across to someone, but accosting them in the grocery store, not a great idea.
Before we get back to this amazing story, and there's so much more to come, I want to take a moment to talk to you about RBC. And by the way, I'm not compelled to do so. This isn't part of their sponsorship. They're here for the same reason I'm here. We want to share stories of positivity and possibility, and proving that even in times like this, we can overcome circumstances, chase dreams. What I want to share with you is a new campaign they've created called You Deserve, starring Will Arnett. And why this ad struck such an emotional chord with me is, yes, we live in this very convenient world, and our phone's this vending machine, and the world's within arm's reach of desire. But there are times when we need to sit face to face with somebody that cares. There's times when we need advice, we need help, we need a place to share an idea and to make our dreams come true. And this is what this ad says to me, that the DNA of RBC is people. People that are there to help you get to where you need, want, and deserve to go. So here's this wonderful new campaign called You Deserve. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
What makes a bank more than a bank? It's more than products, apps, ATMs. It's being there when you need them, with real people and real conversations. Let's face it, life gets real. RBC is the bank that we Canadians turn to for advice. Because at the end of the day, that's what you deserve. A track record, not some trend. Your idea of banking that's personal happens here. RBC, ideas happen here.
We need everybody to not just crawl, but to toddle and then to walk and then to run and then to sprint, because we need everybody sprinting, teaching people, bringing everybody along, because we're going to need every voice.
My guest today is Rima Berns-McGowan, academically trained, evidence-based, devoted part of her career to serving the public, and now is a medium. What's the most powerful thing that's happened when you're this conduit or medium between somebody here and somebody who's no longer here? I'm not even sure you can say no longer here, but some here in a different manner.
I think when you do this work for any length of time, you come to recognize we are energy beings having a physical existence, not the other way around. We're always here in one form or another. And I can give you so many powerful examples. There was a young man who came to see me about a month ago. And I said, is there somebody particular that you want to connect with? And he said, yes, but I don't want to tell you who because I don't want it to come from me. And I'm like, absolutely fair. I said, well, I can feel a few people. And the first and strongest person feels like a maternal figure, mother or grandmother. And I gave him very specific examples of what she was saying she looked like and was wearing. And he said, oh my goodness, yes, that's my grandmother. And she used to wear that. And I said, she wants to say that she's really sorry for having given you a really hard time for not having gone to church enough. And the other thing that she was doing, which was really beautiful, and this was like the evidential thing, is like I kept saying, there's so much emotion for you, so much love. And he said the very last thing that he saw her doing was this when she was in hospice and couldn't talk anymore. But the main thing she wanted to get across was that the rules of the church that she had been given to understand them, that she thought was so important, lest you end up going to the bad place, were nonsense. She said when she got across to the other side, all she encountered was love and acceptance. And there was no sense of, okay, you followed enough rules and therefore. That's just not what happens. It's just all love. So we were talking and somebody else comes in, and then I said, oh my goodness, did you lose a young person recently? And he just was like, yes. And I said, okay, there's somebody here. He's wrapped in like white swaddling cloths, like he's being healed. And he wants to say he's really sorry for the pain that he caused you and his family. And he is somebody who had taken his own life, had chosen to leave. And he said, I need you to know that when I crossed over, all I met was love. And it mattered because this was a very strong Catholic family. And the grandmothers having come through here first to say those set of rules that you don't get to be embraced and to love if you've taken your own life, they're nonsense. You'll be healed. And it was just so incredibly beautiful.
Do you believe that you meet up with the people in your past life when you go to this place, which is all love? I mean, do you reconnect with family and friends?
100%. And the thing that I've also come to really have a sense of is that our ancestors, our loved ones who cross over never leave us. They're constantly there helping us, supporting us. At moments of emotional poignancy, that connection is always there.
You know, it's interesting. My wife talks about her three angels, which are her two dogs in her past life and her husband who she lost. And one day I'm driving, we just started seeing each other probably a couple months in, and these three birds land on my windshield wiper and stop and look at me. And they stare and they stare, they look at each other and fly away. And I called my wife and said, the most crazy thing just happened. I'm driving home and we just literally started to see each other. She goes, oh, those are my three angels. They're here to check you out. What's your sense of death? Has this changed your fear of death?
I am not afraid of it at all anymore. And you know that thing that happens when you wake up at 3 a.m. and you start doing that little existential hamster wheeling thing? I don't do that anymore, ever. It's gone because I feel like I have such a much stronger sense of connection to the bigger picture, for want of a better word. I think when we become disconnected from what is going on, big picture, that's what that middle of the night sense of like, is all about.
And how do you feel about human beings now that you've had a chance to talk about us in a different state, where it's all about love and kindness and forgiveness and I'm sorry I gave you all that pain? How come we become such different people when we're inside these human beings, that we're greed and power and let's go back to the beginning of the show and what got you out of politics, and the nastiness and the divide takes over?
There seems to be a fair amount of evidence that we don't do this only once, that we cycle in and out in different bodies and different genders and different relationships with each other, that we do it with some other energy beings who are there in multiple incarnations, if you will. It's like we're soul groups and soul families, and we go in and out. And some of us are in spirit while others of us are having a physical experience. And we sort of help each other because the point of all of this is to grow your soul. It's to be better. It's to learn to be less greedy, less mean, less nasty to each other, to just learn how to be better.
But the argument then would be the longer we advance as a human race, collectively, we should all be getting better because we're all getting better at improving our souls. But I would argue that this time in history, I don't see a lot of improvement in the human race. I mean, let them eat cake and Rome is burning. It has come back into a whole new manifestation now.
I think about that a lot as well. I don't think this is a linear thing. I don't think progress is linear. The idea that if you don't learn from history, you're condemned to repeat it is absolutely true. It's not a question of a collective, like the whole human race learning something. It's almost like we have to learn it as individual souls. There's still a lot about how the soul works that I don't begin to understand.
Another question I have for you, and I mean, I could talk to you for a week. Do you fall in love up there? Do you have relationships up there? Or is that what makes you want to go back to Earth because you don't have the same sense of adventure with another person?
I don't know. But I think that love means something different when we're not trapped in a physical body. And so we don't have the same boundaries or jealousies or sense of like, I can only love one person or they're going to be jealous. When my mom died, it was in the early 2000s, and my dad was not a person he was deeply loyal to my mom. He adored my mom. She adored him. They had a wonderful marriage, but he was only in his late 60s, so he wasn't okay being alone. And he re-met this woman who was the widow of a childhood friend of his, and they struck up a connection. He'd been an architect. She'd been a teacher. They were both artists. He ended up in New Zealand at my cousin's house, borrowing a car and driving around New Zealand, wondering whether he could have a relationship with somebody else, anybody else, and not be disloyal to my mom. And my dad, I love him to bits and I just adore him, but he wasn't always a person who was full of insights about himself. But as he was sitting on that beach, he suddenly had the understanding that there was absolutely no way he could be disloyal to my mom, because after 45 years of being head over heels in love with one another, she was inside him. She was a part of him. And so he was taking her with him into any other relationship he had. And that's the spirit with which he began the relationship with his partner.
And has his wife and your mom ever come through you and said she's happy that she's part of that?
I am absolutely certain of it. When my dad died a year and about 15 months ago, he was in London at his partner's place. And about 10 days before he died, I went downstairs to make coffee and he was in the next room and I could hear him talking to someone. And I said, "Papa, who are you talking to?" And he said, "Mama's here. Mama's here." That's a common thing when people are close to passing, that they can see somebody that they love from the other side. But it was so clear to her and to me as well that she was the one who kind of popped that idea into his head in the first place, that I'm not jealous because I'm over here. I want you to be happy.
How about the survivor though? How about, the one that he remarried and they painted together and held hands together? And how does she feel now? Does she feel she's lost him forever because he's going to go back to his original wife? Or does it, because I'm always interested in the people left behind as well.
Again, I think that our sense of connection and love is so much more expansive than we imagine it to be when we're here in our fleshly bodies and we can only see things in kind of narrow ways.
And how do people that love you and know you, do they relate to you differently now? That's almost like you can read my mind, or you're in a different plane than I am, or do they just appreciate you for you?
People just treat me as me. And then if they have a question, they will sometimes ask me. They will say, "Hey, what do you think about this?"
How easy is it to turn off that tap? Because I have to believe that the stronger you get in the field, the more people up there are going, this is a great gateway. This is somebody that does have ethics. She has a sense of humanity. There has to be quite a backlog up there of people going, my turn.
The best way to put the answer is that I outsource the gateway. I use the term spirit, but you can say God or Allah or Adonai or creator, source, whatever you want. I do believe there is a larger force that is a force for good. And I am doing this work in the service of spirit. There's a website, but if somebody can't afford to pay, but I'm the right person to hear them, they can reach out and message me. There have been a number of people who've come to me through like really interesting, circuitous ways, but the people in spirit have been really insistent that they need me to connect with that person, and that's happened.
You know, Rima, I could talk to you forever, but I always end my shows with sort of my observations. And the first one is, you truly are about good over evil. Even when you're in politics or writing in academia, it's all about how can we create a world where nobody loses and everybody wins. And then when you realize that when you speak from evidence, people lean in and want to learn. And that seems to have carried you across evidence-based academia, right through Parliament, when even the opposition would lean in as opposed to just dismiss you as some sort of left-wing person. Even today, you give people 2 or 3 things up front that relax them and realize that they're going to have a conversation that's going to matter. I guess the final lesson is we really are here to represent good. The fact that there is a force of good in this world. I think it's in everybody's interest that we listen harder for it, because it's easy to believe it's disappeared because there's so much negativity coming at us today. There's so much impossibility. There's so much sky is falling. But I think if we just step aside once in a while and sit on that stoop like you did with that person for an hour and a half and saved his life, that if we just sat and listened to the good more, I think we'd be, for our time on this planet, we would do a much better service to it.
Thank you. Thank you. That is, I'm near tears. That's really beautiful. And I could not agree more. I think if we just all were able to be still and quiet and feel inside for that good, all of us are capable of it, and we're capable of connecting to it.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.